They expected your voice to shatter the quiet. They expected your words to map a path back to familiar ground. They expected the familiar heat of your frustration to keep their control intact. But they didn't anticipate the physics of a door closing without a sound. Because a loud argument only proves you're still invested. A quiet exit proves you've already moved on. And now, they are left to measure the exact distance between their assumptions and your absence. You know the exact texture of that exhaustion. It's not in your muscles. It's behind your eyes. In the hollow space where your patience used to live. You spent months, maybe years, translating their chaos into sentences they could finally hear. You drafted the arguments in your head at 2 a.m. You rehearsed the perfect phrasing. You believed that if you could just find the right combination of words, they would finally see the fracture lines you'd been pointing to all along. But clarity is a language they refuse to learn. And you finally stopped speaking into a wall that only ever echoed your own fatigue back at you. You realized the debate was never about truth. It was about stamina. So you laid down your voice and stepped away from the arena. Chapter 1. The Exhaustion of Echoes. You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you started reading the ledger. Every raised voice, every carefully constructed paragraph, every time you lowered your defenses to reason with a system that only understands pressure, it all accumulated. Not in them. In you. The human nervous system cannot sustain perpetual translation. You were burning your own oxygen to keep a dead dynamic breathing. You mistook volume for progress. But arguing with someone who profits from the confusion is like trying to carve geometry out of water. The surface ripples. It settles. Nothing changes. The silence you chose wasn't cowardice. It was a ceasefire with your own depletion. You finally recognized that your loudest defense was just another form of surrender. And surrender, when disguised as persistence, is the most expensive habit you will ever break. You weren't fighting to be understood. You were fighting to prove you hadn't been broken yet. But the quiet exit doesn't ask for permission to survive. It's simply an exit. Chapter 2. The fracture in their script. They built their entire framework around your reaction. Every provocation. Every manufactured crisis. Every subtle recalibration of blame. It was a script. And they knew their lines because they wrote them expecting your rebuttal. They prepared for the pushback. They braced for the emotional negotiation. They anticipated the familiar choreography of conflict. Accusation, defense, temporary truce, reset, repeat. But you didn't hand them their cue. You stepped off the stage and left the lights on. That's what they couldn't compute. A loud argument confirms your position in their ecosystem. It tells them they still matter enough to disrupt you. It validates their gravity. But a quiet exit doesn't signal defeat. It signals relocation. You moved your center of gravity without announcing the coordinates. You stopped playing the counterweight. And when the primary witness withdraws from the trial, the courtroom doesn't adjourn. It just echoes. You replaced engagement with observation. And observation is the one thing control cannot manipulate. Because you can't negotiate with a mirror that refuses to reflect. Chapter 3. The Neurology of the Unmet Loop. Let's strip away the mythology of closure. The human brain is a prediction engine. It craves pattern, even a destructive one, because predictability registers as safety to the limbic system. When you argue, you feed the prediction loop. They push, you respond, the cycle completes, the dopamine regret axis resets. It's a closed circuit. Your silence severs the wire. And the nervous system of the person on the receiving end doesn't register peace. It registers a prediction error. A glitch in the operating code. Without your voice to bounce off, their internal narrative loses its structural tension. The ego does not thrive in stillness. It thrives in opposition. It requires a counterweight to measure its own mass against. When you remove your resistance, you don't just stop a fight. You remove the friction that kept their identity calibrated. They begin to scramble for data. They replay conversations. They invent motives. They project their own instability into the quiet space you vacated. Because the mind cannot tolerate an uncompleted pattern. It will fracture the truth before it will sit with the void. This is operant conditioning in reverse. You've extinguished the reinforcement schedule. And without the reward of your attention, the behavior doesn't fade gradually. It panics. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Unanswered Gravity. This is where the real work begins, for them. You assume absence means detachment. It doesn't. It means exposure. Without your arguments to deflect, without your explanations to dissect, they are left alone with the raw architecture of their own behavior. And that architecture was never built to withstand its own weight. Watch for the stress tests. They always appear. The sudden, unearned vulnerability. The carefully timed checking in. The indirect messages designed to pull a single thread. These are not reconciliations. They are sonar pulses. Pinging the darkness to see if you're still in the water. But you've already learned the new physics. You don't dive. You observe from the shore. And with every ignored pulse, the certainty they relied on begins to corrode. Not from your malice. From your irrelevance. The quiet exit doesn't punish them. It forces them to sit with the one thing their entire strategy was designed to avoid. Themselves. They will try to rewrite history. They will narrativize your absence as weakness or cruelty or a phase. But the story collapses under its own weight when there's no one left to perform the other half. You are no longer the conflict. You are the silence that exposes it. Chapter 5. The Sovereign Threshold. And this is where you cross the line from survivor to architect. The quiet exit is not a retreat. It is a strategic reallocation of resources. You are no longer spending your cognitive load on a ledger that will never balance. You stop waiting for them to understand what they are committed to misunderstanding. You begin treating your presence as what it actually is. A privilege, not a given. The loudest argument in the world only rearranges the furniture in a burning room. The quiet exit walks out of the house, shuts the gate, and stops watching the smoke. You don't need their apology to validate your departure. You don't need their confusion to confirm your clarity. You are rebuilding your attention span from the ground up. Calibrating your nervous system to peace instead of preparation for battle. You are no longer available for recruitment back into a war you already won by leaving it. Your energy is the battlefield. And you've finally learned to raise the drawbridge without announcing it. You didn't abandon them. You stopped financing their delusion. Let them navigate the silence without your compass. Let them learn the difference between being challenged and being irrelevant. Your attention is not a public utility. It is a private vault. Guard the threshold. Withdraw the audience. Starve the noise. Close the door. Don't look back.